personalize it against Jews. I mean, when I grew up as a kid, we were Jewish, anti-Semitism was a very, very visible phenomenon. I mean, I grew up in a part of a lower middle class section of a city where we happened to be the only Jewish family in an Irish and German Catholic neighborhood, which were mostly Nazis, pro-Nazi, pretty openly. And, you know, I grew up with a visceral fear of Catholics. I mean, it wasn't until I was an adult that I could deal with Catholics and somehow not be afraid. It wasn't much fun, you know. And when they came out of that Jesuit school, you know, they were frightening creatures. Furthermore, when my father finally got enough money to get a second-hand car and we could drive around a little, if we'd get to the nearby mountains, we'd have to look for a motel because a lot of motels had on them restricted. That means no Jews, you know. When I got to Harvard in 1950, the anti-Semitism was so thick you could cut it with a knife. In fact, one of the reasons MIT here is a great university is because a lot of first-rate people like Paul Samuelson and Norbert Wiener didn't get jobs at Harvard because they were Jewish. In fact, Harvard got their first Jewish mathematician, you know, it's a Jewish field, while I was there in 1953 because the department was so anti-Semitic. I mean, this all changed in the 50s, but up until that time, anti-Semitism was perfectly overt and very real. And the Jewish community was subdued. You didn't want to be too visible, you know, because you got enough problems. It's one of the reasons why refugees from the Holocaust didn't come here. You know, almost anybody in Europe, certainly people in the DP camps, would have been delighted to come to the United States. They didn't. Refugees from the people who were dying in the DP camps after, after the Germans were defeated. They were still there, and it wasn't very nice. In fact, it hadn't changed much, except that the crematoria weren't going. Very few of them came to the United States, partly because of anti-Semitism, partly because the Jewish community didn't want them, didn't push to bring them here, and for reasons that are, not pretty, but are understandable. And we've got enough problems. The anti-Semitism is no longer a legitimate form of racism. Anti-Arab bias is a legitimate form of racism, meaning you don't have to hide it. Okay, most forms of racism, you have to pretend you're not a racist. So you have to pretend I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm not anti-black. You may be, but you don't advertise it. Anti-Arab racism, you're allowed to advertise. Now, this is way before September 11th. And the community, you see it in films and books and attitudes. It's just not even hidden, you know. I mean, nobody will come out and say, I'm an anti-Arab racist, but it's in, it's everywhere. And every Muslim or Arab in the country knows it. Okay. Now, after September 11th, I should add that this shows up in behavior too. So just to give you an illustration, Boston happens to have a big Lebanese community. And while they're not super wealthy, they have money. You know, they're storekeepers and businessmen and so on. In 1982, at the time of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, which was a total horrible atrocity, a few of us made an effort to organize just a charitable relief program for people in Lebanon. We could not get any support from the Lebanese community here. And I think I understand why, because I remember it from childhood. I think they just don't want to be too visible. And I think that's understandable. I can't prove that, but that's the sense that I had. And it's not just, since September 11th, yes, it's increased, but not only Arabs, I mean anybody who looks a little bit dark.